What is up, everyone? This is Kevin from Happy Gardening, and today we're going to talk about a disease that has resurfaced with vengeance on my pumpkin vines this past week. We're going to talk about powdery mildew. We'll take a look at my vines. We're going to talk about why it has resurfaced over the last several days, and we're going to go over some of my go-to options for treating powdery mildew. But before we do, please help me out by clicking that like button below. And if you're new to my channel, please click that subscribe button. All right, let's talk about powdery mildew on pumpkin vines. So while taking my dog out this morning, I was scanning over my pumpkin vines and I noticed that there were white spots on all the leaves throughout my vine. And I knew right away that powdery mildew was back. And this is despite successfully fighting off two small outbreaks over the past month or so and keeping it at bay. So what brought it back? It was actually the weather that we've had here in the Philadelphia area over the past week or so. We had an early September heat wave where it brought in some warm, humid nights. And powdery mildew thrives in high humidity nights, low humidity days, and when temperatures are about 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The high humidity helps with spore formation, and the low humidity helps with spreading of the spores. And powdery mildew development stops when temperatures go over about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Over the years, my go-to treatment options have been neem oil, sulfur, and copper. A lot of people swear by milk, but it just really hasn't worked out well for me. Neem oil, copper fungicide, and sulfur all have their pros and cons. Starting with copper, while it's been the most effective for me when I have a bad powdery mildew infection, I try to use it sparingly because once it washes off your pumpkin leaves and into the ground, it will never go away. And over time, this copper is going to build up in your yard with repeated treatments. Also with copper, you have to be careful because you can burn your leaves. With sulfur, it's most effective when used before powdery mildew has really taken hold of your vines. Once the powdery mildew is well established in your garden, it's no longer a viable option. And like copper, sulfur can cause foliage burns and damage. You also don't want to mix sulfur with other treatments in the same tank or spray. And also be sure to follow the instructions on the bottle about any other treatments after applying sulfur. For example, you don't want to apply any oil-based treatments such as neem oil for 2 weeks after applying sulfur. Lastly, this leaves us with neem oil, my favorite form of treatment for powdery mildew. I love neem oil for a number of reasons. It's natural, it can be mixed with other treatments, and it can be also used for treating pests such as squash bugs. And while neem oil can also cause leaf burn, my personal experience is that it is much less likely than sulfur and copper. Lastly, neem oil is very effective as a preventative for powdery mildew, but I found it to be less effective for me when powdery mildew gets really, really bad. Another good practice is to cycle through your treatment options throughout the growing season. For example, I use neem oil on a regular basis. I try to limit copper fungicide to 1 or 2 times per season, and I fill in with sulfur. As for the application of these fungicides, I follow the directions provided on the bottle. Some bottles will provide a range, and others will provide a plant-specific mix ratio. And when a range is provided, I typically lean towards the upper end of the range. Just don't go over because more is not necessarily better. Going over the recommended amount will likely cause damage to your pumpkin vines. When spraying the fungicide, cover your leaves thoroughly, both the infected and non-infected leaves. Powdery mildew also forms on the underside of the leaves, so it's important to also spray both the top and the bottom of the leaves. For leaves that are heavily infected, you'll want to cut the leaves off entirely. These leaves will most likely die off no matter what treatment type is used. And by cutting them off, you will help with preventing the spores from spreading to the rest of your vine. So there you have it. That's a look at my powdery mildew infected vines, my go-to treatment options, and how to use these different treatment options. I hope you found this video helpful and took away some good information and tips for your own pumpkin patch. Be sure to stick around for some more future videos because guess what? It's almost time to harvest these pumpkins. I'll give you some tips on how to harvest your pumpkins. As always, thank you for watching and happy gardening.